I do want to get into some of the law stuff though. So I'm really
Yeah, let's do it.
I want to get your thoughts on the Supreme Court and the justices. I think it's really cool what you have shared with me about this in the past. So, can you just talk about how the justice system works, maybe what the split is right now? Um, do you have any, and if you have any insights on, like, I know you know some of their specific names and kind of their background, and then also I want to talk about um, the winning side when they do have a vote on a topic, and we could use Roe v. Wade as an example, but I know the winning side gets to write it or write the law, and I think that's really fascinating too. So that's a lot, but
It
maybe
doesn't. It's not. It's yeah. It's not even. I'll unpack this because that's not quite how it works. So you
okay,
have. I mean, so there's nine. Hasn't always been nine. It's been nine for a long time. It's not like written down anywhere that there has to be nine. I think the only thing really related to this is that they serve under good behavior, which basically means they have to be impeached. They don't have to retire ever. I think that's pretty sure that's true for all federal judges. But so you've got an odd number. That's important that there's an odd
for the
number so you
vote,
don't get
yeah.
ties. And then you have right now it's a 6-3 split, conservatives to liberals. It's not it's really not quite that even, and what you're talking about is sort of why, because Roberts is very conservative, but Roberts is as the Chief Justice, and so like William Rehnquist died in 2004, I think, and George Bush, he was the previous Chief Justice. As the president, you can either appoint a new justice and then pick from one of the justices the new Chief Justice, or you can just appoint the Chief Justice. So within like the conservative judicial reform movement in the last like probably 40 years, uh, they've made a concerted effort to get young conservative justices on important federal courts because they can pretty much serve until they die. So Roberts was appointed, I think he was like 40, pretty young. Same thing's kind of with Barrett, the new one. She's like super young. Roberts is also, though, really concerned with the perception of the court. So he will try his best. He wants the outcome that he wants, but he wants it to be kind of like keeping up with. He doesn't want it to upset the public too much because, in a lot of ways, the legitimacy of the court comes entirely from it has no enforcement power. So the public needs to kind of agree with what the court is saying. Otherwise, they just won't enforce it. Like, what are they going to do? What's the old Andrew Jackson line? He's made his decision. Now let's watch him enforce it. Because there's nothing they can do. It doesn't matter what they say unless
Right.
everyone just says, okay, they're right because they said it. So you got Roberts, and it's weird to say because now with Barrett, he's really the center of well, depending on how you look at it. I would actually make the argument Gorsuch, who's the first Trump appointee, is probably really the center, but he's weird. He's a textualist, so he's very focused on literally what words literally mean. So like there was a Title IX, Title VII, I think Title IX case with sex discrimination and being a protected class. Like the protected classes under Title IX are like, they're like immutable characteristics, meaning like your race or your sex. And so some guy, I can't remember the name of the case, Obergefell maybe, I think that sounds right. Uh, Basically, this guy gets fired for being gay. And Gorsuch interprets that to mean, well, the text says sex is a protected class, and he's being fired for doing something that he wouldn't be fired for doing if he was a woman. So he's being fired because he's a man, not because he's gay. Because a woman could do these things, and she wouldn't be fired for being gay. Basically, a woman can have sex with a man and keep her job, but they're firing him because he's a man, not because he's gay. I realize
That seems a little.
this is what I mean.
Yeah.
No, he's a textualist, right? So he's like, it really upset conservatives. And that's why Kavanaugh, I think
I
it's
feel like common
more.
sense of the people, I mean, everyone would agree that that's not an accurate interpretation, though, and he should be
No,
at the highest
yeah.
standard.
So when they're looking to figure out what the statute means, because this is them interpreting Title IX, um, they have a lot of different ways to try and figure out what the legislative intent was. But Gorsuch doesn't care about legislative intent. He cares about what the words mean. And so no discrimination on the basis of sex to him means he's being fired because he's a man. It doesn't matter that he chose to do this as a man. If a woman had chose to do it, she wouldn't be fired. Therefore,
Right.
this is discrimination on the basis of sex. Obviously, conservatives were like furious because that's not what they put him on there to do. And that's why you have Barrett, who's, I think a bit of a Looney Tune, but I mean, it's really hard to say what she thinks. I just know what people say she thinks. I haven't actually read many of her opinions. I don't think she's written one since she's been on the court yet. But I think he's really the middle. Well, let's say it's Roberts. So Roberts being Chief Justice, if it's a 4-4, which this is the problem. Roberts is probably the fourth, but he's not the middle. But so if we can get one conservative over to the liberal side on an issue, like this is what happened in Obergefell. I think it's Obergefell. It's a case, Obergefell, but I might be wrong, and I hate if I'm wrong. I'm going to look like an idiot because it's like something I learned in first year of law school. So if he's on the side of the liberals, Roberts is going to just basically side with them and write this in a way that's not going to upset people, even though Roberts might disagree with it. So for example, the Affordable Care Act thing, the individual mandate, if this is a fine for not having insurance, it's not one of the basically the foundation of almost all the power of Congress to legislate across the country is based off of their ability to regulate interstate commerce that crosses state lines.
Okay.
You can't regulate commerce that doesn't exist. You can't regulate the absence of commerce. So Congress can't pass a law saying we're going to fine you for what you didn't buy. They can only pass a law saying we can fine you for buying something. Yeah. But so what's funny is that when they get to the argument point, Roberts says, well, it's not even a fine. It's really a tax. And Congress can tax for fucking whatever at this point. I should just read the Constitution out loud to you at this point, but Congress has the power to levy taxes. And people are furious. They're like, it's clearly not a tax. It's not written as a tax. Maybe it's functionally like a tax, but it's not a tax. But it doesn't matter. He said it's a tax, and he wrote the opinion. And so this is the point I wanted to get to. It's not that they vote, and then he picks who writes it. You could have 9 people write an opinion, and the justices, let's say you have 2 write an opinion.
Okay, so
and the justice.
Wait,
yeah,
real quick. What do you mean when you say write the opinion? What is the? It's like so law gets passed.
Let's just say no. There's a law. Someone's lit. Only certain things can go to the Supreme Court. I mean, so state law issues can only go to the state Supreme Court of that state unless it implicates a constitutional issue, which is technically federal law. But and you can pretty much always make an argument that your Fourth Amendment right is being violated or something. So you can always appeal to get it there. But let's say it's a statute. You're saying this is unconstitutional, goes through the appeals, goes to the Supreme Court. Let's say there's one judge, writes the opinion. That's the opinion. Let's say there's 3. They can all 3 write an opinion. That's their decision. If they were just one, this would be the judge's decision. But because there's multiple, basically you have 2, and then the third one's I'm going to decide which one to sign on to. You can literally have 3 separate opinions, and it's just, there's no binding decision, right? There would be no decision. This is why we want an odd number, because they've recognized that there is value in having a decision. What's fascinating is, God, there's been a couple cases where there's plurality opinions. There's 3 and then 4 and then 2, and the 4 wins, even though it's not a majority. Or you'll get concurring opinions where they sign on to the judgment and the opinion of the judgment, but then they write their own opinion as a concurrence. And where I think you get really interesting things reading the dissents, which is basically the judges that lost, they write their opinion anyway, and they oftentimes will be like, the majority opinion is wrong for this reason. Because if you look back historically, oftentimes the dissents, as things progress and change, become the law later. So like if you want to read about some civil war cases, some civil rights cases from like the late 1800s, Justice Harlan, there's the first one, there's two, keep that in mind, has some of the best dissents, because you have all these judgments coming out during the Civil War about like, yes, slaves aren't people, or like separate but equal, and or separate but equals from the 90s, but like, no, it's separate from equals, Plessy v. Ferguson. Basically, like, it's a guy that's an 8 black, and he's in the wrong car. He's got to sit in a different train car. But he's like, but I'm not. He was actually he was litigating off of the basis that he's not black, not that he should be in the white car, not that the black car should be integrated. And, goes to the Supreme Court, and they're like, separate but equals fine. And Harlan, I think Harlan wrote one on this. Can't remember the exact cases but he has some of the best dissents, because they end up becoming law later.
So does dissent mean the minority opinion?
Yeah, the dissent is a justice that didn't sign on to the majority and doesn't agree with the decision. So they're important because they add context to what the other opinion was, and they highlight periods in time where the court majority opinion was like a dying opinion. Like, that was the opposite of progress. And so in these cases in the last like 10 years, I mean, you should go and read some of the dissenting opinions from Citizen United. If you know what Citizen United is?
No.
Citizens United is the case that basically like broke campaign finance and changed everything for everyone for forever. So it was the case that said corporations are people.
Okay.
So corporations,
I do know that corporations are people from like my line of work.
Just so we're clear, they're not people.
Well, okay, but I know they're treated as people in a lot of ways.
Yeah, in the eyes of the law.
Right, and also like tax purposes, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, and there's a lot of, we might be talking about slightly different things.
And ownership, but we probably are. But in my
this is different, and I think that's just piercing the corporate veil jurisprudence. Basically, like, you don't get to hide behind a corporate structure if you're really not a corporation. But in terms of campaign finance and corporations being people, there was just this issue with like corporations basically buying political candidates, and they don't have First Amendment rights, but they do now. So like, if money is speech, if my political support monetarily is my expression and association under the First Amendment, and that is something that's held by people but not businesses, corporations becoming people gets kind of problematic, because now companies can just buy the candidates they want and pool their money together in a way that they couldn't prior to that for political reasons. And they can also do it without really disclosing where it's coming from. So now you have PACs and super PACs, political action committees, and there's just a lot more money behind politics now that people don't really know where it came from than there ever used to be. So that's why I say broke whatever for forever.
Dude, I think we'll have to do a whole nother podcast on that sometime, because that's super fascinating.
Yeah, it's the court is definitely influencing things in ways that people don't really see. But if you contextualize it from a historical perspective, you can see how things are different. And, just like news and information today, so much faster, that I think in my paper, which you should read, asshole, I talk about the problem today is not an absence of the freedom of speech. It's too much speech. There's so much speech that you don't know what's real and what's not. And it gets to the point where you start to just think everyone's lying. No one's real. And I think it's a concerted effort to confuse people. And Supreme Court has kind of opened that in the last 20 years. But back to my point about dissenting opinions, reading dissenting opinions from like linchpin periods in time and then seeing how they flip later, assuming they flip, is very telling from like a contextual standpoint. I mean, you should read I know you want to talk about Roe v. Wade. You should read the dissenting opinions from Roe v. Wade, because they're honestly pretty compelling. There's some problems with Roe v. Wade. They just kind of invented a right.
Okay, hold on one sec. Your video froze. I'm gonna just try turning off your camera, and then you turn it back on.
Got it. Cool. Am I back?
Yeah, I think you are.
I wonder if it's just going to record it separately regardless, and maybe it's the streaming part that's not quite connected.
I do know that it told me it's going to look fuzzy when we're doing the actual recording, but that at the end it will look good.
Yeah, I just not worry about it. We'll figure it out later. Okay. If it's just audio, it's not the end of the world. Okay. We'll have plenty of chances to redo this, I suppose. So you've got Roe v. Wade is, well, really, this is great. I'm realizing I know more about law than I thought. Roe v. Wade is really an extension of a case, Griswold v. Connecticut, which is about contraception and state courts, state legislatures, Connecticut in particular, banning the use and sale of contraceptives. So
that's like how it all got started?
Well, that is the jurisprudence that Roe v. Wade is built off of. So in giving that opinion, basically the Supreme Court in Griswold says you can't tell people that they can't use contraception because, and they go into the sanctity of the marriage relationship and it being an intimate, private thing, and they make inferences from what they call the penumbra of rights that exist in the Constitution, basically saying that, like, you know, across different amendments in the Bill of Rights and like just kind of like theories behind independence and liberty, we're kind of assuming that you have a right to privacy to practice certain things in your own home. And nobody had a problem with that when it was, I mean, people in Connecticut who wanted to punish people for having sex had a problem with it because they don't want you to have contraception because you're only supposed to have sex to have babies. So they had a problem with it. But I think most people were like, yeah, this is kind of stupid. But so when Roe v. Wade comes around, they make the same argument. They build it off of that. That's the precedent that they use, that you have a right to privacy that isn't explicitly mentioned in the Constitution, but we can infer it from all of these other things that are explicitly mentioned. And it's fascinating because, like, you hear people talk about this today, and they're like, "There's no right to abortion or to choose in the Constitution." There's a lot of things that we give you rights for today that aren't explicitly mentioned either. But that's the argument that they make, and the dissents in Roe v. Wade are like, this isn't really like said anywhere. They're kind of just like using this to justify. I mean, better yet, is the real issue with abortion that it's being done in private? No, probably not. I don't think that's really what people are arguing about. But autonomy over healthcare choices is kind of a private thing. And insofar as you're considering the mother, that I think that qualifies as a health choice. And I don't want to get too far into it because I can dissect what I think the issues with the abortion debate are wholesale for hours, and I don't want to necessarily go down that road, but just understanding that that's where that came from, and then you get 50 years of it because this in the 70s. We had a pretty liberal court. I believe that was the Warren Court. Can't remember. Now we have a very conservative court, and we have for probably about 35 years since about Reagan. So
when you say court, are you talking about the justice system, or are you talking about Congress, Senate?
The balance. So, like, I'm talking about the 9 justices on the Supreme Court, but when I say it's a conservative court, I mean that it's just balanced to that direction.
Okay.
In the 70s, 60s, and 70s, you have Earl Warren as the Supreme Court Chief Justice, and it was an incredibly liberal court, and that's why you have all these civil rights acts of like the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
because we had a bunch of liberals on the court. I mean, honestly, from like FDR for like 30 years, I think most of the political leadership in the United States was incredibly liberal. Like pretty much from the Great Depression until like Jesus, I would say Reagan almost. Like everybody, like the U.S. was pretty liberal, and then you have like a couple exceptions, like Nixon, and you know we saw how that went. So like it's pretty understandable. I think there's a lot of great literature out there suggesting. Like I have a book called "One Nation Under God," and it's all about how like the GOP. It's like right here. The GOP like weaponized Judeo-Christian beliefs to try and control the narrative about that to get basically like the Christian right as we know it today didn't used to be the Christian right. It used to just be the right, and like there were Christians kind of on both. But now we have this kind of correlation between the church and the Republican platform, and I think people think, well, that's just always been that way, but it really hasn't. This was like a very
I thought it had always
focused,
been that way. Yeah.
No, absolutely not. It was a very focused, like deliberate political effect or effort to put that imagery together to recruit basically Christians into conservatism. I mean, I guess if you were to unpack like biblical messages of like love and taking care of people and like what would Jesus do, like I don't know, man. I kind of feel like that lines up more with like liberal thought. Like if Jesus were here today, but if Jesus was here today, do you think he'd be like?
He would not be a conservative.
Would he be for like social welfare? Or
maybe I need to put more thought into that. Maybe he would, but yeah, no,
it's pretty fantastic.
The immediate thought is that he'd probably be liberal. Yeah.
No, what you should do is, you know, Al Franken is.
Mm-hmm.
Al Franken was he was actually a Saturday Night Live writer for a while, but he was also a senator from Minnesota for a while. He has a great book. He's super liberal, super funny. He has a great book called Lying Lies. Here it is. It's called Lying Lies and the Lies Who Tell Them. It's great. He had this thing. He resigned. He had like a Me Too thing that came out with. I think it was a little misunderstood, but okay. he definitely resigned. It was with some Saturday Night Live girl that came up from later, and I honestly haven't read enough of it to talk about a hand grenade topic like that. But he has this comic that he made called Supply Side Jesus, and you should totally read it when we're off of this. It's really not that long, but it's Jesus. It's capitalist Jesus. And so he's like walking through Jerusalem and they're like, Jesus, shouldn't you heal the lepers? And he's like, healing them would just disincentivize them from helping themselves. It's like supply side Jesus. Like the whole thing is like that. And in reading that, it's hard for me to think like, I don't know if I think Jesus would be like really that far right, but maybe that's just me.
Okay, so